My name is Lillian, and at 38 years old, I never imagined being a divorced single mother, selling the family home we lived in for 15 years. The house where every corner held memories of my late husband Thomas. I thought I was making a practical decision. My son Jackson saw it as betrayal. Now I have a broken relationship with my only child, and I am questioning everything I thought I knew about being a parent. If you have ever had to make difficult family decisions that others didn't understand, let me know where you're watching from and subscribe to join me on this journey. Growing up, I always believed I would have a conventional life path. College, career, marriage, kids, in that order. But life had different plans. I met Thomas during my first semester at community college. He was 4 years older, charismatic with skilled hands that could build anything. By 18, I was married. And by 19, I was holding our son Jackson in my arms, my education temporarily on hold. We were young and broke, but deliriously happy. The first few years were spent in a tiny apartment where the three of us were packed together like sardines. Jackson slept in a crib in our bedroom, and we dreamed of the day we would give him his own space. Thomas worked construction during the day and took night classes to become an architectural draftsman. I worked part-time at a local insurance agency while juggling childcare. When Jackson turned 4, Thomas came home one evening with a gleam in his eye that I recognized from our earliest days together. He had found it our dream house. It wasn't grand by any means, a modest 3-bedroom ranch-style home built in the 1970s with outdated wallpaper and worn carpet. But it had potential, as Thomas kept repeating during our first walkthrough. Most importantly, it had a spacious, detached garage that could serve as Thomas' workshop. I remember Jackson's face when we first brought him to see the house. His eyes widened at the backyard with its single maple tree perfect for a future treehouse. He ran from room to room, his little sneakers thumping on the hardwood floors, claiming the smallest bedroom as his own before we had even decided to buy. Using every penny of our savings and taking on a mortgage that scared me sleepless some nights, we made that house our own. Thomas spent weekends tearing out the old carpet, refinishing hardwood floors, and teaching Jackson how to safely use sandpaper. I still remember 4-year-old Jackson with his tiny face mask diligently sanding a cabinet door, looking up at his father with pure adoration. The garage quickly transformed into Thomas' sanctuary. He installed pegboards for his tools, built sturdy workbenches, and set up a small area just for Jackson with miniature versions of his own tools. That workshop became their shared space where father and son bonded over sawdust and the smell of fresh-cut pine. Thomas would lift Jackson onto his workbench, showing him how to measure twice and cut once, how to feel the grain of wood, how to bring beauty out of raw materials. For 8 beautiful years, we filled that house with laughter, love, and the occasional argument. We hosted backyard barbecues in summer, carved pumpkins on the front porch in fall, and decorated a Christmas tree in the corner of the living room each December. Thomas and Jackson built a treehouse together when Jackson turned 10. It was imperfect but sturdy, just like our little family. Then came the day that split our lives into before and after. It was an ordinary Tuesday. Thomas kissed me goodbye, ruffled 12-year-old Jackson's hair, and left for work. By noon, I received the call that changed everything. Thomas had collapsed at a job site. Massive heart attack. By the time I reached the hospital, he was gone. Just 33 years old. The shock was unbearable. How could someone so vibrant, so strong, simply stop existing? The doctors mentioned an undiagnosed heart condition, words that floated around me without fully registering. All I could think about was how to tell Jackson that his father, his hero, would never come home. The memory of Jackson's face when I told him remains burned in my mind. The confusion, the disbelief, then the crushing realization. He ran to the garage workshop and locked himself inside. I could hear him crying through the door, but he wouldn't let me in. It was the first time I realized that grief could be both shared and deeply personal. The months following Thomas' death were a blur of paperwork, financial worries, and attempting to create a new normal. The life insurance helped, but it wasn't enough to pay off the mortgage. I went from part-time to full-time at the insurance agency, picking up every extra hour I could. Some nights, I would come home to find Jackson asleep in the workshop, curled up on the old sofa Thomas had put there for breaks, clutching one of his dad's flannel shirts. The house became our grief anchor. Every corner held memories of Thomas, his coffee mug still hanging on its hook in the kitchen, the slightly uneven shelf he installed in the living room, the height marks on the doorframe tracking Jackson's growth next to Thomas's playful marks tracking his own imaginary shrinking. I sometimes found myself standing in doorways he had once filled, trying to summon the sound of his laugh. For Jackson, the workshop became sacred ground. He spent hours there first, just sitting among his father's things, then slowly beginning to use the tools. By 14, he was creating small projects, using his father's techniques. By 16, he had developed his own style, though I could always see Thomas' influence in his work. We survived those grief years together, the house wrapping around us like a protective cocoon. Jackson and I developed new routines: Friday movie nights, Sunday morning pancakes that never tasted as good as when Thomas made them. We kept going, kept breathing, kept putting one foot in front of the other. When Jackson started his senior year of high school, everything shifted again. College applications, campus visits, planning for a future that suddenly loomed close. Jackson would be the first in my family to attend university, something Thomas and I had always dreamed of for him. He received a partial scholarship to State University about 3 hours away. The day we dropped him at his dormitory was a strange mixture of pride and loss. His roommate seemed nice, the campus beautiful, but driving home to an empty house opened a void I hadn't anticipated. For the first time in 19 years, I was truly alone. The house, once full of teenage energy, fell silent. Jackson's room remained unchanged, a museum to his childhood. The workshop gathered dust as months passed without its faithful apprentice. I rattled around those familiar spaces, feeling increasingly untethered. Then came the job offer. A significant promotion at work with better benefits and a substantial salary increase. The catch: relocation to the company headquarters 200 miles away. My initial reaction was to decline. How could I leave the house where Thomas' memory lived in every nail and floorboard? But as winter turned to spring, the practical side of my brain began to make its case. The mortgage was still substantial. The house needed expensive repairs that I had been postponing. The property taxes increased every year. Jackson was building his own life at university. And most telling, I began dreading coming home to the empty house. Maybe I thought it was time to move forward. Not to forget Thomas. I could never forget him, but to stop living in a museum of what used to be. I began to think of selling not as abandonment, but as practical forward movement, something the pragmatic Thomas might have endorsed. I convinced myself it made perfect sense, and that Jackson, busy with his new college life, would understand once I explained my reasoning. That was my first mistake. The decision to sell our family home wasn't made lightly, despite what Jackson would later accuse me of. I spent weeks running numbers, calculating finances, and consulting professionals before I fully committed to the idea. My financial advisor, Laura, nodded approvingly when I mentioned the potential sale during our quarterly meeting. I remember her words clearly. "Lillian, from a strictly financial perspective, this is the smart move. Property values in your neighborhood have nearly doubled since you purchased. With the market this hot, you could walk away with enough to buy a smaller place outright and still have a cushion for Jackson's education expenses." I scheduled a meeting with a real estate agent the following week. Margot Winters arrived at my doorstep with a portfolio of comparable sales and an enthusiasm that both reassured and unsettled me. She walked through the house with a professional eye, noting the original hardwood floors, the updated kitchen Thomas had renovated years ago, and the mature landscaping. "This place will sell in days, not weeks," she declared confidently. "Have you discussed this with your son?" The question caught me off guard. I stammered something about Jackson being busy with final exams and not wanting to distract him. Even as the words left my mouth, I recognized the excuse for what it was: avoidance. "That's understandable," Margot replied, though I detected a note of reservation in her voice. "Will he be helping with packing and sorting?" I brushed off the question with vague assurances that would figure it out. The conversation then shifted to listing prices and marketing strategies, safer territory that didn't probe the unease growing in my stomach. That evening, I sat in the living room, my laptop open to Jackson's class schedule I had insisted he share with me when he started college. He was indeed in the midst of finals period for his freshman year. Calling now would only stress him out, I reasoned. Better to wait until his semester ended, when he could process the information without academic pressure. But even as I closed the laptop, I knew there was more to my hesitation. The truth was, I feared his reaction. Jackson had always been more sentimental than me, more attached to physical representations of memory. While I saw a house requiring maintenance and draining finances, he saw the backdrop to every significant childhood moment. Another voice in my head, the brutally honest one, whispered that I also feared he might talk me out of it, that his emotional attachment would override my practical decision. And I had already begun to envision my new life unburdened by the constant presence of loss. So I made the second mistake. I decided to present the sale as a fait accompli rather than a family discussion. I would tell Jackson after arrangements were in place, but before anything was finalized, I promised myself. That way, I wouldn't disrupt his studies, but he would still technically be informed before the actual sale. With that moral compromise firmly in place, I gave Margot the green light to list the house. Within 3 days, I had multiple offers. The winning bid came from a young family with 2 small children. The perfect symmetry of passing the home to another family just starting out did not escape me. They offered $15,000 over asking price cash with a quick closing timeline. It felt like validation. "See, everything is falling into place," I told myself. This is the right decision. With the closing date set for 3 weeks later, I began the daunting task of sorting through 17 years of accumulated life. The main living areas were manageable clothes books, kitchen items, all relatively straightforward to categorize into keep, donate, and discard piles. The workshop was different. I stood in the doorway for nearly an hour before I could bring myself to step inside. The space remained exactly as Jackson had left it before heading to college, which meant it still contained the essence of Thomas as well. His hand-drawn plans tacked to the corkboard, the coffee can filled with special screws he collected, the radio permanently tuned to the classic rock station he preferred. I started with what seemed easiest, the practical items. Power tools were carefully packed for storage, hardware sorted into labeled containers, wood supplies stacked and secured. But then came the personal touches. The mug with "World Greatest Dad" that Jackson had given Thomas for his 31st birthday, still holding pencil stubs. The handprint impression Jackson had made in a cement stepping stone when he was 6. The collection of father-son projects completed over years of weekends. I told myself I was being careful, thoughtful. I photographed everything before packing, planning to create a digital album for Jackson. The most significant items I set aside for storage, small enough to fit in my new place, or for Jackson to keep in his future home. But as the hours stretched into days, practicality began to override sentiment. The wobbly birdhouse from Jackson's first solo project, too fragile to transport safely. The collection of wood scraps Thomas saved for no clear purpose. Unnecessary weight. The outdated drafting equipment, technologically obsolete. With each item relegated to donation or discard, I felt a complex mixture of guilt and liberation. I was making hard choices, I reasoned, preserving what mattered most while preventing us from being buried under possessions. Thomas would understand. He was never one for clutter. Meanwhile, my real estate agent found me a perfect condo in my new city. 2 bedrooms, updated appliances, a small balcony, and most importantly, walking distance to my new office. I signed a purchase agreement, timing it to align with the house closing. Everything was proceeding with an efficiency that felt almost predestined. In quiet moments, usually late at night, when the house seemed to creak with memories, doubt would surface. Was I making a terrible mistake? Should I have consulted Jackson first? Was I erasing Thomas too thoroughly in my rush toward a new beginning? I pushed these thoughts aside with activity scheduling, movers forwarding mail, notifying utilities. I was a tornado of productive motion, too busy to second-guess, too occupied to fully feel. The day I signed the closing papers, I sat in my car afterward and wept. Not delicate, dignified tears, but ugly, body-shaking sobs that seemed to come from some primal place within me. I couldn't even articulate exactly what I was grieving: the house itself, the memories it contained, the phase of life it represented, or perhaps the simple fact that I had made this momentous decision alone. When the storm passed, I dried my eyes, reapplied my makeup, and drove to my hotel room. The moving truck was already en route to the new condo. I had given myself a week to settle in before starting the new position. Everything was proceeding according to plan, except for telling Jackson. I had composed and deleted dozens of text messages and emails, none capturing the complexity of what I needed to say. I finally settled on an approach: tell him in person when he came home for the upcoming break. I'd show him pictures of the new place, explain the financial benefits, help him understand this was a positive step forward for both of us. It wasn't until I was unpacking boxes in my new condo that I realized my critical error in timing. Jackson had mentioned coming home the weekend before his break officially started to pick up some books he'd left behind. In the chaos of moving, I had completely forgotten. By then, it was too late to intercept him. The new family had already taken possession of our home, and my son was about to discover my betrayal in the most painful way possible. The call came on a Friday afternoon as I was arranging framed photos on my new bookshelf. I had just placed a picture of Thomas holding newborn Jackson next to one from Jackson's high school graduation when my phone lit up with my son's name. "Mom." His voice sounded strange, tight, and high. "Where are you?" "I'm at the new condo," I replied, a sick feeling spreading through my stomach. "Why?" "The new condo," he repeated flatly. "So it's true. You sold our house." I closed my eyes, cursing my poor planning. "Jackson, I can explain. I was going to tell you when you came for break. I wanted to tell you in person." "In person?" His voice cracked. "There are strangers in our house, Mom. Their kids are playing in my room. All our stuff is gone. I had to find out by showing up and having strange people answer the door." I sank onto the couch, photo frames forgotten. My carefully planned explanation disintegrated as the reality of what I'd done hit me. "Jackson, I'm so sorry. This isn't how I wanted you to find out. It's just that the timing with your finals and the real estate market being so good right now." "Stop. Just stop," he cut me off. "I don't want to hear about the real estate market. You sold our home without telling me." "Dad's home." The accusation in those last two words, "Dad's home," felt like a physical blow. "It was my home too," I said defensively. "My name was on the mortgage. I was the one maintaining it, paying for it." "Dad built that house for us," Jackson interrupted. "Every part of it had him in it. His workshop." "I guess that's gone too." I swallowed hard. "Not gone. I saved the important things. The tools, his plans, the projects you two made together." "What about his workbench? The one with all his measurements carved into the side? What about the shelf where he kept all his special wood pieces? What about the drawer with all his handwritten notes?" Each question felt like an indictment. I had photographed the workbench, but deemed it too large to keep. The wood collection had mostly been donated, and the notes I'd kept some, but not all, believing the photographs would be sufficient. "I saved what I could," I said weakly. "What you thought was important," he corrected. "Did you even look in the bottom drawer of his tool chest?" The one with the locked box. I frowned, trying to remember. There had been so many containers, drawers, and boxes to sort through. I did donate his old tool chest. It was rusty and too heavy. Oh my God, Jackson whispered. The box had all his letters to me, the ones he wrote for my future birthday's graduation wedding. He showed it to me after he got diagnosed with his heart condition. Said if anything ever happened to him, Mom would make sure I got them when the time was right. I felt like I'd been doused with ice water. Thomas had never told me about any letters. When had he been diagnosed? What else had he kept from me? And more importantly, what had I unknowingly discarded? Jackson? I didn't know. He never told me because he trusted you to respect his space. Jackson shouted, his voice breaking. He knew you would never sell the house, never get rid of his things without talking to me first. He trusted you, Mom. His words cut deeper than any knife. In my rush to move forward, had I betrayed not only Jackson's trust, but Thomas as well. We need to contact the new owners, I said quickly. Explain about the tool chest, the letters. I'm sure they haven't, it's gone, Jackson interrupted. I already asked them. They had a garage clean-out service come yesterday. Everything left there was either taken to the dump or donated. The finality of his words left me speechless. Those letters, irreplaceable pieces of Thomas meant for our son, were gone forever because of my decisions. I don't understand how you could do this. Jackson continued, his voice now frighteningly calm. You didn't just sell a house. You sold our memories. You sold Dad's presence. And you did it without even giving me a chance to say goodbye. Jackson, please, I begged. Let me explain. There were financial considerations. The new job opportunity. The house was too big for just me. I saved so many things, I'm an adult, he cut in. If there were financial issues, you could have talked to me. We could have found solutions together. But you made this enormous decision that affects both of us, like I was a child who didn't deserve a say. I was trying to protect you, I said. You were dealing with finals with adjusting to college? Stop, he said again. Just stop making excuses. This wasn't about protection. This was about you not wanting to deal with my reaction. You knew I would be upset, so you just decided not to tell me until it was too late for me to object. His assessment was so accurate, it left me breathless. Had I really been so transparent, so selfish? I need some space, Jackson said into my silence. I can't talk to you right now. Wait, when will I see you? You're still coming for break, right? I asked desperately. No, I don't think so. I can't stay in a place I've never been that has none of our history. I need to process this. Jackson, please, I said, tears flowing freely now. Don't do this. We're still family. Family consults each other about major decisions, he replied. Family respects each other's feelings. What you did felt like you were trying to erase Dad. Erase our life together. That's not what I was doing, I protested. Intent doesn't change impact, Mom. That's something Dad always said. Remember? Before I could respond, the line went dead. I called back immediately, but the call went straight to voicemail. I sent text after text, each more desperate than the last, with no response. That night, I wandered through my new condo, surrounded by boxes containing fragments of our old life, feeling more alone than I ever had. The practical decision that had seemed so clearly right now felt catastrophically wrong. I had gained a new home, but might have lost my son in the process. In the spare bedroom, I found the boxes labeled workshop memories. I opened them with trembling hands, now seeing each item through Jackson's eyes. The coffee mug that I had casually wrapped in newspaper. The stepping stone I had considered too heavy, but packed anyway. The handwritten plans that I had kept more out of habit than deliberate choice. And I wondered what else I had packed away without understanding its true value. What other pieces of Thomas had I unknowingly discarded? What irreplaceable treasures had I sacrificed on the altar of moving forward? Outside my new windows, an unfamiliar city hummed with activity. Inside, I sat surrounded by the physical remnants of a life I had dismantled, questioning every decision that had led me here. In the weeks following Jackson's discovery, I launched a campaign of reconciliation that bordered on desperate. I sent daily text messages, each carefully composed, to convey my remorse without pressuring him for an immediate response. I assembled digital albums of photos from the house and workshop meticulously labeled with dates and descriptions and emailed them to him. "Hi, honey. Remember this picture from your 10th birthday? This was right after Dad finished building your treehouse. Look at how proud he was watching you climb up for the first time." The response, when it finally came 3 days later, was brief and cold. "Thanks for the picture." Encouraged by even this minimal engagement, I sent more. I cataloged items I had saved from the workshop, offering to ship anything he wanted to his dormitory. I proposed visiting him at university, suggesting we could have lunch off campus to talk things through. His replies grew increasingly distant. "I'm busy with midterms. No need to ship anything now. No space here. Not a good time for a visit." Each response felt like another brick in the wall forming between us. I tried to respect his need for space, while terrified that space would become our permanent state. The promotion and new job that had seemed so important now felt hollow, as I excelled professionally while my personal life crumbled. My colleague Amanda became my unwilling therapist during lunch breaks. Unlike the friends who automatically took my side, Amanda asked the uncomfortable questions. "Did you ever actually sit down and consider what that house meant to Jackson?" she asked one day as we sat in the company cafeteria. "Of course I did." I defended myself. "I knew he had memories there, but he's building a new life at college. I thought he'd understand, making a practical change." Amanda gave me a look I was beginning to recognize her not buying it expression. "Lillian, that house wasn't just where he grew up. From what you've told me, it was the only place he had memories of his father. The workshop was their special place together, and you dismantled it without giving him any warning or choice in the matter." Put that way, my actions sounded callous even to my own ears. I saved things I said weakly, important things. "But you decided what was important," Amanda pointed out. "Not Jackson. And from what you've shared, you missed something huge: those letters." The letters had become my recurring nightmare. I would dream of finding Thomas' tool chest, opening the locked box, only to watch the letters turn to dust in my hands. I had contacted the new homeowners, the garbage service, even local second-hand shops, all to no avail. That piece of Thomas, meant specifically for his son, was gone forever because of my oversight. As October turned to November, the approaching Thanksgiving holiday loomed like a test. I was destined to fail. It would be our first major holiday separated since Thomas's death. I had always been adamant about maintaining family traditions, especially after losing him. Jackson and I had faced every celebration together, sometimes tearfully, but always together. I called Jackson on a Sunday afternoon, having rehearsed my approach carefully. "Hi, sweetie. I was thinking about Thanksgiving plans. I could drive up to campus, and we could have dinner at that nice restaurant we saw during orientation. Or if you'd prefer, you could take the train down and see the new place. I've set up the guest room for you." There was a long pause before Jackson spoke. "Actually, I've made other plans. Matt's family invited me to join them at their lake house. Matt, his roommate. I'd met him briefly during move-in day, a friendly boy with perpetually disheveled hair." The rejection stung more than I wanted to admit. "Oh, I see. But Thanksgiving is our family holiday, Jackson. We've always spent it together even after Dad am aware of our history." "Mom," he interrupted, "but given everything that's happened, I think some distance would be good for us both." "Distance is the last thing we need right now." I argued, my planned calm approach crumbling. "We've had nothing but distance for weeks. We need to talk to work through this. Talk about what," he asked, his voice taking on an edge. "About how you unilaterally decided to sell our family home. About how you didn't think I deserved to be part of that decision, Or maybe about how you're so ready to move on from Dad that you threw away his things. That's not fair, I shot back, stung by the accusation. I haven't moved on from your father. I will never move on from loving him. But continuing to live in that house alone was breaking me, Jackson. Every day was a reminder of what I'd lost, both your dad and now you being away at school. So your solution was to erase all those memories he demanded, to start fresh like none of it ever happened. Not erase, recreate, I insisted. Create a new home that isn't filled with ghosts. As soon as the words left my mouth, I knew I'd made another devastating mistake. Ghosts, Jackson repeated, his voice suddenly quiet. Is that what Dad is to you now? A ghost you needed to escape? No, that's not what I meant. I backpedaled desperately. I meant the sadness, the emptiness, not Dad himself. You know what I think, Jackson said? I think part of you did want to erase him. It was easier to pack everything away, start new somewhere else, than to actually process your grief. And you never considered that I might need those physical connections to Dad, that the workshop, his tools, his actual handwriting on notes, the smell of sawdust in the garage. All of that helped me feel close to him. His insight penetrated my defenses, too accurate to deny. Had I been running from grief rather than moving toward healing? Had practicality been my excuse rather than my reason? I need more than just a breakover. Thanksgiving. Jackson continued into my silence. I need real space to figure out how I feel about all this. What does that mean? I asked, fear tightening my chest. It means I don't want to talk for a while. Not texts, not calls, not emails with pictures. I need to focus on school and process everything in my own way. Jackson, please, I begged, panic rising. Don't cut me out. You're all I have left, and you are all I had left of Dad, he replied. But that didn't stop you from selling his home without telling me. The call ended shortly after, with no resolution, no reconciliation, and no clear path forward. I sat in my new living room, surrounded by carefully arranged furniture that had never known Thomas' touch, and felt more adrift than ever before. That evening, I found myself opening the photo albums I'd created while packing. There was Thomas young and vibrant, swinging a toddler Jackson in our first backyard. There we were, as a family, painting the living room, all three of us speckled with the sage green Id insisted would bring tranquility to the space. Page after page of birthdays, Christmases, ordinary Tuesdays, made special simply by being together. I stopped at a photo I'd forgotten taking. It showed Thomas and 12-year-old Jackson in the workshop, bent over the workbench, foreheads nearly touching, as they examined something small between them. Neither was aware of the camera. The concentration on their matching profiles, the mirrored tilt of their heads, the shared moment of complete absorption, this was what I'd lost. Not just memories, but the physical space where father and son had connected most deeply. For the first time since Thomas' death, I allowed myself to question whether Id truly grieved him at all. Or had I simply been surviving, pushing forward, making practical decisions while keeping the deepest pain carefully contained? Had selling the house been the ultimate act of avoidance rather than the step toward healing? I'd framed it as Thanksgiving approached, I declined well-meaning invitations from new colleagues, unable to bear the thought of forced cheerfulness among strangers. Instead, I spent the day alone in my condo, attempting to recreate our traditional meal in miniature. The turkey breast I cooked was dry. The stuffing from a box tasted nothing like the recipe Thomas had perfected. The pumpkin pie I bought sat mostly uneaten. That evening, I broke my promise not to contact Jackson and sent a single text, thinking of you today. Love you always. The lack of response echoed through my empty new home, louder than any words could have been. Christmas approached with a relentless cheer that felt like mockery against the backdrop of my fractured relationship with Jackson. The new city embraced the holiday with enthusiasm. Festive lights twinkled from every storefront, carols played in coffee shops, and my office buzzed with plans for the company holiday party. I participated in the expected social rituals with a painted-on smile, all while feeling hollow inside. My new condo remained mostly undecorated. I couldn't bear to unpack the box labeled Christmas ornaments, knowing each one would trigger memories of our family traditions. The star Thomas had carved by hand for our first Christmas tree. The collection of handprint ornaments tracking Jackson's growth from pudgy toddler to lanky teenager. The mismatched stockings Wed hung faithfully each year, adding Jackson's when he was born. Yet one evening, in mid-December, after a particularly difficult day at work, where a colleague had innocently asked about my holiday plans with my son, I found myself opening that forbidden box. The tissue-wrapped bundles lay nestled inside each, containing a fragment of our shared history. With trembling hands, I unwrapped the star Thomas had made. The simple 5-pointed shape carved from pine still smelled faintly of woodshop when I held it to my nose. Thomas had finished it with beeswax instead of polyurethane, insisting that natural materials should be treated with natural protectants. The warm honey scent had faded over the years, but wasn't entirely gone. I sat on my living room floor and wept, clutching the star to my chest. For the first time, I fully confronted what it done, not just selling a house, but dismantling the physical space that held our family history without giving Jackson the chance to say goodbye. In my rush toward practicality, toward moving forward, I'd robbed him of his final moments in the only home he'd ever known. The realization broke something open inside me. I'd been so focused on Jackson's reaction on his anger and sense of betrayal that I'd never fully acknowledged my own grief, both for Thomas and for the home Wed created together. The practical decision-maker in me had overridden the grieving widow, the nostalgic mother, pushing those emotions aside in favor of forward momentum. That night, I reached out not to Jackson, respecting his request for space, but to his roommate, Matt. We had exchanged numbers during freshman move-in with the typical just-in-case assurances parents make when sending children off to college. "Hi, Matt. This is Lillian Jackson's mom. I know this is awkward, but I just wanted to check that he's doing okay." He asked for some space, which I'm respecting, but I'd appreciate knowing he's all right. I sent the text with low expectations, assuming Matt would either ignore it or respond with polite vagueness. To my surprise, he replied within minutes. "Hi, Mrs. Anderson. Jackson's okay. Busy with end-of-semester stuff. He's spending a lot of time at the campus woodshop. Seems to help him." The campus woodshop. Of course, my son was recreating the one sacred space he had shared with his father. The knowledge was both painful and oddly comforting. "Thank you, Matt. That helps more than you know. If he's willing, please tell him I'm thinking of him." No pressure to respond. Matt's next text provided an unexpected window into my son's life. He's been making some cool stuff. Started with a small jewelry box, now he's working on something bigger. Says it's helping him process things. Process things. Such a gentle euphemism for the grief and betrayal he must be feeling. Yet there was something hopeful in the image of Jackson working with his hands, channeling his emotions into creation, just as Thomas had always done. Through careful, occasional texts to Matt over the next weeks, I assembled a fragmented picture of Jackson's life. He was doing well academically despite everything. He had joined a grief support group on campus, and most significantly, he had secured a part-time job at the university woodshop, supervising other students and maintaining equipment. I found myself wondering what specific items from the workshop would have meant the most to Jackson. The tools we had used, certainly. But what about the less obvious things? Thomas had been a note-taker, jotting down measurements, ideas, and occasional philosophical musings on whatever paper was handy. Had those scraps of his handwriting been more valuable to Jackson than the expensive power tools I'd so carefully preserved? One particular memory surfaced a wooden ruler Thomas had modified, carving additional markings for common measurements he used repeatedly. It had been hanging on the pegboard, and I vaguely recalled wrapping it with some other hand tools. I spent an entire evening searching through boxes in my storage closet, eventually finding it nestled between a hammer and a set of chisels. The ruler was unremarkable to anyone who didn't know its history, 15 inches of maple darkened with age and handling with neat notches carved at seemingly random intervals. But those notches had meaning. Thomas had marked common furniture dimensions, the exact height of our kitchen counter, the width of standard door frames in our house, the precise circumference of my wrist, where he measured for a bracelet he made me for our 10th anniversary. I ran my fingers over the markings, realizing each one represented a project, a moment in time, a physical manifestation of Thomas' mind. This wasn't just a tool, it was a key to how he saw the world. And Id nearly discarded it as just another ruler. How many other similarly meaningful items had I overlooked in my efficient packing? How many pieces of Thomas had I lost without recognizing their significance? On an impulse that felt almost desperate, I contacted the new owners of our house. I'd exchanged email addresses with them during the closing process, with the usual neighborly assurances about being available for questions about the property. My message was direct. Had they found anything left behind in the garage? Specifically, an old metal tool chest with a locked bottom drawer. Their response came the next day, kind but disappointing. They had indeed hired a clean-out service for the garage, wanting to convert it into a home gym. Everything had been removed months ago. They were sorry they couldn't be more helpful. I tried tracking down the clean-out service, then local donation centers, even browsing online marketplaces for anything resembling Thomas's tool chest. All led to dead ends. The letters, if they had indeed been there, were gone. As Christmas Eve arrived, I found myself alone in my condo, having declined invitations from well-meaning colleagues who couldn't bear the thought of anyone spending the holiday solo. I'd ordered Chinese food and was picking at it half-heartedly when my phone chimed with a text. My heart leapt when I saw Jackson's name. Merry Christmas, Mom. Just those 3 words, but they felt like the first drop of water after months in a desert. My fingers trembled as I replied. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. I love you so much. I'm so sorry for everything. I watched the screen, seeing the 3 dots appear and disappear several times before his response finally came through. I found a therapist here at school. Been talking about Dad, about the house, about grief. It's helping. I blinked back tears, hope stirring for the first time in months. I'm so glad, honey. That's really good. Another long pause before his next text. She says I need to acknowledge that the house was your home too, that you had the right to make choices about your living situation, that it's not fair to make you live surrounded by ghosts. My own words thrown back at me, but somehow transformed through the lens of his therapist. I took a deep breath before responding. Thank you for sharing that, but your feelings are valid too. I should have talked to you before making such a big decision. I was wrong not to include you. His response came quicker this time. Yeah, you should have. The simple agreement without elaboration felt like truth finally acknowledged between us. No justifications, no excuses, just recognition of the hurt I'd caused. Are you doing okay? I ventured, not wanting to push too hard, but desperate to maintain the fragile connection. Working through stuff. The woodshop helps, like it did for Dad. I smiled through tears at the comparison. It hadn't occurred to me before how similar Jackson and Thomas were in their processing of emotion, working through feelings with their hands, creating order from chaos, finding peace in the tangible. He's with you there, I wrote. In your hands, in how you see wood grain, in the way you solve problems. 3 dots appeared and disappeared multiple times before his next message. I need to go. Matt's family is doing a Christmas Eve thing. But, well, talk later. Okay? It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. but it was an opening a crack in the wall he'd built between us. My hands shook as I typed my reply. Of course. Enjoy your evening. Thank you for reaching out, Jackson. It means everything. That night, I slept with Thomas' wooden ruler beside my pillow, a tangible connection to the man we'd both loved and lost. For the first time since selling the house, my dreams weren't haunted by regret, but tinged with the faintest hint of possibility. The next morning, I woke to another text from Jackson, a photo of a small wooden box he'd made its lid inlaid with a pattern of contrasting woods, forming a stylized tree. The craftsmanship was exquisite, showing both Thomas' influence and Jackson's own developing style. His message read simply, "Dad taught me the basics. I'm learning the rest." I studied the image, seeing in the precise joinery and thoughtful design both the father who was gone and the son who was finding his way forward. In that moment, I understood something essential that I'd missed in all my practical planning and forward momentum. Thomas lived on, not in the house we'd shared or the workshop I had dismantled, but in the skills and sensibilities he had passed to our son. And I had nearly severed that living connection through my careless haste. With that realization came the first true stirrings of a path toward reconciliation, not through justification or defense of my actions, but through honest acknowledgement of the harm it caused and genuine commitment to helping preserve Thomas's legacy in the ways that truly mattered to Jackson. Spring semester arrived with a tentative thaw in both the weather and my relationship with Jackson. Our text exchanges, while still somewhat formal, had become more regular. I had learned to respect his boundaries, keeping my messages brief and undemanding, while he had begun occasionally initiating contact rather than merely responding. I had also started seeing a therapist, something I'd avoided since Thomas' death. Dr. Winters, a compassionate woman in her 60s, gently but firmly challenged my tendency to frame every decision through the lens of practicality. "Tell me, Lillian," she said during one session, "how would you describe your grieving process after Thomas died?" I shifted uncomfortably in the plush armchair. "I was focused on survival," I answered. Jackson was only 12. He needed stability, normalcy. I couldn't fall apart. "And your own grief," she pressed. "When did you allow yourself to fully feel that?" I stared at her, momentarily speechless. The question implied a dedicated period of emotional processing that simply hadn't existed in my experience. "There wasn't time," I finally said. "There were funeral arrangements, insurance claims, a mortgage to pay, a child to raise. I grieved in private moments when Jackson was asleep." Dr. Winters nodded thoughtfully. "Many single parents, especially those who lose partners, suddenly put their grief on hold to function for their children. But grief doesn't disappear when ignored, Lillian. It goes underground and shapes our decisions in ways we may not recognize." Her words illuminated something I'd never consciously acknowledged. The selling of our home hadn't just been about financial practicality or career advancement. It had been an unconscious attempt to escape the physical space that constantly reminded me of my unprocessed loss. "You mentioned that Jackson accused you of trying to erase Thomas," Dr. Winters continued. "Is it possible there was an element of truth in that? Not that you wanted to forget Thomas, but that living surrounded by his absence had become unbearable." The question penetrated my carefully constructed defenses. "Yes," I whispered, the admission painful, but somehow freeing. "Every corner of that house reminded me of what we'd lost. Some days, I could hardly breathe there. Yet for your son, those same spaces were his connection to his father," she observed. "The same environment affected you both so differently." This insight became the foundation of my healing process, not just from the rift with Jackson, but from the unprocessed grief I'd been carrying for years. I began to understand that my need for practicality, for forward momentum, had been a coping mechanism rather than the character strength I'd always considered it. In late February, I wrote Jackson a letter, not a text or email, but an actual handwritten letter on stationery. I poured everything into those pages, my regret, my understanding of what I'd taken from him, my acknowledgement that he'd been running from grief rather than processing it, and most importantly, my commitment to honoring Thomas's memory in ways that respected Jackson's needs rather than just my own. I ended with a simple request. When you're ready, I'd like to visit campus. Not to push or pressure you, but just to see you. To talk in person, if you're willing. You'll stay at a hotel and work around your schedule completely. I mailed the letter along with a small wooden box I'd found while unpacking another box of workshop items, a simple rectangular container Thomas had made early in his woodworking journey. Inside, I'd placed the modified ruler and several scraps of paper with his handwriting that I'd discovered wedged between workshop manuals. For a week after sending the package, I heard nothing. I tried not to interpret the silence, reminding myself repeatedly that Jackson had every right to respond in his own time or not at all. I focused on work on therapy, on slowly unpacking the remaining boxes that had been avoiding. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday evening, my phone rang with Jackson's ringtone. "I got your letter," he said, after we exchanged awkward greetings. "And the box." My heart pounded as I waited for him to continue. That ruler, he said, his voice softer than I'd heard it in months. I remember Dad using it all the time. He let me add a mark once for my height when I was 10. I didn't know that, I said, smiling at the image. "Where did you mark it?" "At the edge away from his measurements." He said my height was important enough to be on his special ruler. The conversation continued cautiously, circling around memories of Thomas without directly addressing the rift between us. As we were about to end the call, Jackson cleared his throat. "About your visit," he said. "Spring break is in 3 weeks. If you wanted to come, then I'd have more time." The invitation, hesitant though it was, felt like a miracle. "I'd happily come whenever works for you," I said, trying to keep the desperate hope from my voice. "Maybe that Friday we could get coffee or something." "Coffee sounds perfect," I agreed. "Just let me know where and when." After we hung up, I sat motionless, afraid that any movement might somehow jinx the fragile reconnection we'd just established. 3 weeks to prepare, to plan, to hope that this visit might be the beginning of healing rather than another painful confrontation. The intervening time passed with excruciating slowness. I booked a hotel near campus, took the day off work, and drove up Thursday night to ensure I'd be fresh and punctual for our Friday meeting. I barely slept, rehearsing what I might say, how I could best listen, how to be present without being overwhelming. The coffee shop Jackson had chosen was just off campus, a cozy space with mismatched furniture and the rich aroma of freshly ground beans. I arrived 15 minutes early, claimed a quiet corner table, and waited, my stomach in knots. Jackson entered precisely on time. He looked both familiar and different, somehow older, more self-contained. He'd grown his hair longer than I'd ever seen it, and he moved with a deliberate confidence that reminded me painfully of Thomas. "Hi, Mom," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. His expression was cautious, but not hostile. "Hi, honey," I replied, resisting the urge to reach across and touch his hand. "You look good." He nodded a small acknowledgement. "Thanks. So do you." The conversation started awkwardly with surface-level exchanges about his classes, my new job, the unseasonably warm weather. I was careful not to push, to let him set the pace and depth of our interaction. After we'd each had half a cup of coffee, Jackson straightened slightly. "Do you want to see what I'm working on? It's over at the campus workshop." The invitation felt momentous. "I'd love that," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The university woodshop was larger and better equipped than I'd imagined, a sprawling space with multiple workstations, professional-grade tools, and the comforting smell of sawdust and machine oil. Jackson greeted the supervisor with easy familiarity, explaining that he wanted to show his mom his project. In a back corner, partially covered with a drop cloth, stood a workbench in progress. It wasn't an exact replica of Thomas, but the influence was undeniable. The proportions, the storage configuration, certain details that might seem arbitrary to anyone who hadn't known Thomas and his work. "I'm rebuilding it," Jackson said quietly as I stared. "Not exactly the same, but with the same principles Dad taught me. Strong joints, proper wood selection for different parts, thinking about workflow. It's beautiful," I whispered, genuinely awed by both the craftsmanship and the meaning behind it. Jackson ran his hand along the partially completed surface. "The top will be maple like his was. I found some with similar grain patterns." He worked on this project during our visit, explaining his process, the modifications he'd made to Thomas' original design, the techniques he'd learned in the university workshop versus those his father had taught him. I asked questions, genuinely interested, and slowly the conversation became easier, more natural. As he demonstrated a joinery technique I mentioned, a memory that surfaced. "Do you remember when you were about 8 and Dad was building that bookshelf for the living room? You insisted on helping with the dowel joints, and he let you drill, even though the holes ended up slightly crooked." Jackson looked up, surprise giving way to a small smile. He just adjusted his design around my mistakes. Said adaptability was more important than perfection. He always said that I agreed throat-tight with emotion whenever I got frustrated with a home project. A silence fell between us, but it wasn't the tense, awkward silence of our coffee shop meeting. This was contemplative, almost comfortable. "I have some of his notebooks," Jackson said, eventually not looking up from his work. "From classes he took. The community college ones where he was learning drafting. I didn't know he'd kept those," I admitted. Jackson nodded. "He had them in a box in his desk at home. I took them to school with me last fall. Been studying his notes, his way of thinking about design." Another piece of Thomas Id overlooked focused as I'd been on the more obvious workshop items. "Thank you for preserving those," I said softly, "for keeping his knowledge alive." Jackson set down his tools and finally met my eyes directly. "That's what I've been trying to explain, Mom. Dad isn't just memories to me. He's skills, he's knowledge, he's a way of seeing and working with wood. When you sold the house, especially his workshop without warning me, it felt like you were cutting off my access to that part of him." The clarity of his explanation pierced me. I'd been so focused on physical objects, on memorabilia, that I'd missed the deeper connection, the transmission of craft, of approach, of seeing the world as Thomas had seen it. "I understand that now," I said, "and am so sorry I didn't see it sooner. I was thinking about practical things, costs, maintenance, career opportunities. I wasn't thinking about the workshop as a living connection to your father." "My counselor says we all grieve differently," Jackson offered, returning to his work. "That my way isn't better than yours, just different." The olive branch extended through the wisdom of his therapist brought tears to my eyes. "Yes, she sounds very insightful." As our visit drew to a close, Jackson mentioned tentative plans for the summer. "I've applied for a furniture-making internship in Vermont. It's competitive, but my professor is writing me a recommendation." "That sounds perfect for you," I said sincerely. He hesitated, then added, "If I don't get it, I might need a place to stay for a few weeks in June, before my summer classes start." The invitation was clear, a tentative step toward rebuilding our relationship, toward potentially sharing a home again, even temporarily. "I'd love that," I said simply. "You always have a place with me, Jackson, whenever you're ready." As we parted with an awkward but genuine hug, I felt something shift between us. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but the beginning of a new understanding. The broken trust would take time to repair, but the foundation was there. The shared love for Thomas, the recognition of our different but equally valid ways of carrying him with us. Driving back to my condo that evening, I felt both drained and lightened. The gulf between us hadn't been bridged completely, but we had established the first tentative connection across the divide. It was a beginning fragile but real. The graduation ceremony fell on a perfect May morning, the kind Thomas would have called a gift. Sunshine warming the outdoor amphitheater without being oppressive, a gentle breeze keeping the graduates cool under their black robes. I sat among thousands of other proud parents scanning the sea of identical caps for a glimpse of my son. The invitation to attend had come unexpectedly, a simple text message 3 weeks earlier. Graduation is May 14th. I'd like you to be there if you can make it. Those 12 words had filled me with more joy than any professional achievement or financial success I'd experienced in the past year. Yes, absolutely, I replied immediately. Just tell me what time and where to meet you. Now I shifted in the uncomfortable folding chair program clutched in my hands, waiting for Jackson's name to be called. The College of Engineering and Applied Sciences was midway through the ceremony, and anticipation built with each passing moment. Jackson Timothy Anderson, the dean, announced, and I rose to my feet, applauding with unrestrained pride as my son crossed the stage. He looked so grown up, so confident, so much like Thomas in profile, that my heart squeezed painfully in my chest. As he accepted his diploma, he turned toward the audience, scanning the crowd until our eyes met. He gave a small, distinct nod of acknowledgement, and I felt tears spill onto my cheeks. The past year had been a slow, careful rebuilding of trust. After our initial campus visit, communication had opened gradually. Weekly phone calls became part of our routine. Jackson had indeed spent 2 weeks at my condo in June when his internship application was unsuccessful. The visit had been awkward at first, but as days passed, we'd established new patterns in our new space. The turning point came when Jackson brought one of his woodworking projects to my condo, a small wall shelf designed with my space in mind. As he installed it in my living room, carefully marking the wall drilling with precision, I saw Thomas in every movement, every careful consideration of angle and level. I had an idea, I said tentatively as he finished. The second bedroom. Using as a home office, I don't really need all that space. If you'd be interested, we could convert part of it into a small workshop area for when you visit. He had paused, screwdriver in hand, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Are you serious? Completely, I assured him. Nothing elaborate, obviously, but enough space for small projects. Maybe a workbench along that wall. Jackson had considered the suggestion with the careful deliberation he brought to all design decisions. That could work, he said finally. I need to figure out ventilation for finishes, though. The conversation had shifted into technical details, but the underlying message was clear. He was willing to establish a connection to my new home, to create a space where Thomas' legacy could continue under my roof. Over subsequent visits, the workshop corner had taken shape. Jackson built a compact workbench sized for the available space. I installed special lighting and a small but powerful air filtration system. Together, we mounted pegboard for tools and added shelving for supplies. It wasn't Thomas' workshop, it never could be, but it was a new space that honored his memory through continued creation. More importantly, it became a place where Jackson and I found common ground again. I would sit in the doorway watching him work, asking questions about his process, sharing memories of Thomas that surfaced as I observed. Sometimes Jackson would invite me to help with simple tasks, patiently teaching me techniques I'd never bothered to learn when Thomas was alive. After the graduation ceremony, we met at a restaurant near campus for a celebration lunch. Jackson had invited his roommate Matt and 2 other friends, expanding what might have been an intimate, potentially tense meal into a more comfortable group gathering. As the others chatted about post-graduation plans and summer jobs, Jackson leaned over to speak privately. I have something for you, he said. It's back at the dorm. Can you come by before you head home? Of course, I agreed, curious and touched that he'd thought to give me something on his big day. Later in the now half-empty dormitory room, Jackson pulled a wooden box from beneath his bed. About the size of a large book, It was crafted from walnut with maple inlay, forming a simple but elegant pattern across the lid. "I made this last semester," he said, holding it out to me. "Advanced joinery class." I took the box, admiring the precision of the craftsmanship, the perfect balance of the lid, the smooth finish that invited touch. "It's beautiful, Jackson. Truly." "Open it," he suggested quietly. Inside, nestled in a perfectly fitted interior compartment, lay a collection of handwritten cards, each in an envelope marked with a specific occasion: Mom's birthday, Christmas, Mother's Day, for when you're proud, for when you're sad. I looked up at him confused. "They aren't Dad's letters," Jackson explained, watching my face carefully. "Those are gone. These are from me. I started writing them after our big fight, actually. My therapist suggested it might help me process everything. Then it became something more." With trembling fingers, I lifted one envelope marked, "For when you miss Dad." "Are these for me to read now, or—" "Whenever the occasion comes up," Jackson said with a small shrug, though his expression revealed the significance behind the casual gesture. Like Dad was doing for me, continuing the tradition, I guess. The parallel was unmistakable and deeply moving. In his own way, Jackson was preserving one of Thomas' most meaningful gestures, not by clinging to the lost original, but by creating something new in its spirit. I hugged him, then the box carefully set aside, and felt his arms wrap around me in return, not the stiff, obligatory embrace of recent months, but something warmer, more genuine. "I'm so proud of you," I whispered against his shoulder. "Not just for graduating, but for who you've become. Your dad would be so proud, too." Jackson pulled back slightly, meeting my eyes. "I know this past year has been hard. I'm still sad about the house and his workshop. I still wish things had happened differently." "Me too," I acknowledged. "Every day." But he continued. "I'm starting to understand that home isn't just a place. It's the skills he taught me, the way he showed me to see the world, the values he passed down. I carry those with me wherever I go." His words echoed the journey I'd been on as well. The slow recognition that moving forward didn't have to mean leaving Thomas behind. We carried him with us in ways that transcended physical spaces or possessions. As we finished packing Jackson's belongings into his car, and mine preparing to caravan back to my condo, where he'd stay until his summer job started, he paused by his nearly empty desk. "I was thinking," he said hesitantly, "about that workshop space at your place. I'm seeing that woodworking has become my way of feeling close to Dad, of processing grief, really. I wondered if we might work on something together this summer. Something to remember him by." "I'd love that," I said, meaning it completely. "What were you thinking?" Jackson pulled out his phone, showing me a sketch he'd made, a memorial plaque with inlaid wood, forming a stylized version of our old home silhouette. "Something we could both keep," he explained. "A piece of our old home to hang in our new ones." The gesture brought fresh tears, a symbolic bridging of past and present, a recognition of loss while creating something new. It acknowledged that we would always miss the physical space we'd shared with Thomas, while affirming that his legacy continued through our hands, our hearts, our shared creative process. "Have you learned anything from all of this?" I couldn't help but ask as we prepared to leave the dormitory. The parent in me still seeking to understand, to extract meaning from pain. Jackson considered the question with the thoughtfulness that was becoming his hallmark. "I think I've learned that grief isn't linear," he said finally, "and that people need different things to heal. You needed to move forward in a new space. I needed to preserve connections to Dad through his craft. Neither way is wrong, just different." His maturity humbled me, and I've learned that major life decisions need to be shared, I added, especially when they affect the memory of someone we both loved so deeply. Jackson nodded, a small smile softening his features. "We've both learned that home isn't just a physical place, but the connections we maintain, the skills we pass down, the memories we honor through how we live. As we walked to our cars, I reflected on the journey of the past year, the terrible mistake it made, the painful rift it had created, and the slow, deliberate rebuilding of trust and understanding. The house we'd shared with Thomas was gone sold to another family, creating their own memories within its walls. But Thomas himself remained present in the precise way Jackson measured a board, in the careful consideration he gave to wood grain and joinery, in the creativity he brought to solving design problems. Home, I was learning, wasn't contained within walls or defined by an address. It lived in relationships and shared history, in the passing of knowledge and values from one generation to the next. My new condo would never hold the history of our original family home, but it was becoming a place of connection, nonetheless. A space where past and present could coexist, where new traditions could take root alongside honored memories. The road ahead would still hold difficult moments, I knew. Grief would continue to surface in unexpected ways for both of us. But we were learning to navigate it together, each respecting the other's process, while finding common ground in our shared love for Thomas. As we pulled away from the university, Jackson following my car, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw him adjusting his position, sitting tall behind the wheel, just as his father always had. In that moment, I felt Thomas' presence more strongly than I had in years, not as a ghost to escape, but as a beloved presence whose influence continued to shape us both. Have you ever had to balance practicality with sentimentality in your life? How do you honor loved ones you've lost while still moving forward? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments, and if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for joining me on this journey of healing and forgiveness. Remember that home is where your heart connects, not just where your feet stand.